So this week will be about for loops. So I want to just focus on for loops, do some exercises in your homework, and hopefully we can all get some understanding on what for loops do. So the basic idea of a for loop is that sometimes you want to repeat a segment of code or a calculation a number of times, and the for loop will allow you to do so. And the basic structure of a for loop, so on my screen here, I'm gonna start writing a comment showing the basic structure. So you usually have the for command, and then you have an index with values, right? So this index term is usually a variable which can also be referred to as the counter. And a very common one to use is letter I, or the letter J, or the letter K. And then values is over what range do I want to run this counter over. So let's say I want to run the loop 9 times, so this command becomes for I equals 1 to 9, for example. We'll get to it in a second. Um, after this, after your for line, or the for with the counter and the values over which to count, you have your body of the loop, which is basically the statements you want to execute a bunch of times, right? And then finally, you should always end it with an end statement. So every for loop must have an end statement. So if you have two for loops in each other, you need to have two end statements as well. So you need to have an end for every for loop. And with regards to the end index values, there are a bunch of ways which you can represent it. So for example, you could have, so there are three main ways, right? Three ways to represent the index values line, right? The first way is you can show it as initial value to end value, right? So this is the first way to do it. And I'm going to represent this by writing an example for loop. So let's say I want to write a for loop which shows all the numbers between 1 and 10. So I'm going to say for I equals 1 to 10, just display I and then end. And if you have a look at this for loop here, I'm using this type of format for my index line. So I, again, is the counter variable, initial value 1, final value 10, or end value 10, and then you write the commands you want to execute multiple times. So if I run this for loop, it's going to show me the numbers 1 to 10. Okay, the second way to represent this index value line is using this format. So you could have initial value, step size, final value, right? So when comparing it to the first time where I just have initial value, end value, here I have initial value, and I'm also introducing a step size, right? And then to the end value. And I'm gonna again illustrate the same loop, but this time I'm gonna have this type of command line. So I have my initial value, and step size, instead of using increments of 1, I'm gonna use increments of 0.5. So it's doing the same thing, it's just showing all the numbers from 1 to 10, but now it has increments of 0.5 because I indicated the step size right here. So if I click on enter, you can see that the results are 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, all the way to 10. So my step size is increased based on this step size command I specify. Alternatively, let's say your step size could be greater. So I could have a step size of 2, for example, and in this case you see it's going from 1 to 3 to 5 to 7 to 9. So it's jump increasing by 2. So as long as you specify the step size, your loop will behave accordingly. And then the third way to represent this index value line is by specifying a value array, right? Whatever it is. So for example, an example would be, let's just paste our for loop example, and then instead of having an initial, a final value, or an initial, a step size, and a final value, I'm going to specify an array. So I want this counter to run over this array which has values of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you could specify the array over which you want the counter to loop over. And if you click on enter, it's going to show, it's going to execute what you want it to execute. And the values in the array don't necessarily have to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You could have them as 3, -1, 20, 55, 0.25, whatever. And it will just loop over this array and show you what you want. So these are the main type of index values which you could use in a for loop. So I'll be posting a homework with a few questions talking about this. You have 4 problems talking about for loops and how to run them.